and then over here. Good morning.
Good supporter of culture in New York City.
Welcome.
Excuse me.
On behalf of the Missoula Cultural Council, I'd like to welcome you here to our celebration of the observance of the National Arts and Humanities Month. And I think it's still morning. We're minutes away from afternoon, but we're right in time for lunch. So I would like to suggest that we have the head table head over to the food line and then start on this side of the room if we could, and let's all get in line, get our meal, and then we'll proceed with our program. Thank you. A couple of people who were not able to be here who wanted to be. Barbara Kustra, who has seen the Cultural Council in Missoula flourish. She was our first director and certainly would be proud of the events that we've been able to put together here. And Senator Conrad Burns, who had planned to be here but is not. I think something about working and voting in Washington, D.C. that gets in the way every once in a while. So we do have from his staff Aaron Ballas, and as well from Representative Reberg's staff, Kelly McQuiston. So we appreciate you folks being here today. I was advised to do this, always introduce your boss. So I'd like to introduce to you a person who's new to our community, but has already, I think, built some great bridges across the community and especially in the arts. I'd like to introduce Dr. James Clark, new superintendent of schools in Missoula County Public Schools. And now a gentleman who is a lot more erudite than I ever would hope to be, will carry the program to you now. Please welcome, I should say, Joe Musselman.
Thank you, Paul. I want to first express my appreciation to Mark Martin for inviting me to preside on this august occasion. It's a genuine honor. Can you all hear very well in the various parts of the room? Good. Mark very considerately laid out an agenda for me, and it begins under Master of Ceremonies, remarks of a personal nature. But not many, it says. Well, since I don't know which person to nail, I won't make any personnel remarks. But just between you and me, okay? I think I'd better get on with the business of the hour. Oh, and one more thing, as an ex-university professor, and this being Friday, I understand that the procedure now routinely at the beginning of a class is to announce that there will be no quiz today if you turn off your cell phones. I'm sorry, was that for me?
She's going to get a quiz.
Yeah, quiz for her. I should explain call your attention to these culture kits now. Take a moment to take a peek, if you will. These were decorated by elementary school students under teachers Nancy Zadra and Jane Potts. Ms. Zadra, Ms. Potts, are you here? Well, okay, stand up. Thank you. They contain materials from many Missoula and statewide cultural organizations. There are some free tickets from the Missoula Children's Theater, some free tickets from the Missoula Symphony, and free membership in the Montana World Affairs Council. These are distributed randomly, and that's a polite way of saying there are not free tickets to everything for everybody. So if you want to take a look now, just a quick look, and see what you won, if anything, on signal I will hear a chorus of awesomes or awes. I got a free ride on the carousel. Next, I must explain that the designated tables have been sponsored by various Missoula businesses and cultural organizations so that those entities could invite their friends to share in this occasion. Missoula Community Access Television is videotaping the program for distribution across the state via a grant to this entity. These grants are available to all nonprofit groups in the city. You can contact MCAT at 542-6228 for details. The camera person is Tracy Moore. Thank you, Tracy. Let me introduce three of our special guests now. And you have a microphone before you if you wish to make any remarks at this point. First of all, the Mayor of Missoula, the Honorable Mike Cadiz. And the Missoula County Commission Chairwoman, Jean Curtis. And Executive Director of the World Affairs Council, Mark Johnson. We want to recognize some special guests in the audience. First of all, Congressman Pat Williams, former Congressman Pat Williams, and NEA supporter to whom we extend our gratitude for keeping the faith in our behalf. Linda Anderson is Executive Director of the Glacier County Tourism Commission. Linda? And Si Fu Yang, you stand please, is the Executive Director of the Asian American Center, one of the many ethnic heritage groups that flavor Missoula's cultural environment. And now we turn to an event that I've been itching, pardon the expression, to see for some time, because this is a dance interlude by the Rocky Mountain Ballet Theater. Charlene Campbell is the founder and artistic director. Karen Carreno is the music director. They're going to present a scene, a performance that was part of their Austrian tour program. This past summer, they were one of 5 companies from throughout the United States, one of the top 5 pre-professional companies, to perform in Austria in 4 different venues over there. Their performance is entitled Bugs.
talks, and we hope an agreement with an organization called the Business Committee for the Arts. In November, in conjunction with the our hosting a state tourism conference, we are also going to be speaking with the National Director of the Business Committee for the Arts, Judith Jedlicka, who has been kind enough to write us a note and letting us know that she will be here in November to meet with directors of the Missoula Cultural Council as we inspect and promote partnerships between the cultural community and the business community in Missoula. I must tell you that this town is so supportive of the arts, and it happens in large part because the support for the arts comes from a broad base. A couple of examples would be the role that both Southgate Mall and Montana Rail-Link have played in bringing Art Train to Missoula this past spring. Without them, it would not have happened. That's the kind of support that allows wonderful things to happen in this community. Kauai America presently is allowing our 4 Missoula high schools, Missoula County Public High Schools, to use about $70,000 worth of pianos at no charge for the use of our students. That kind of support impacts the cultural fabric of our community in such a positive way. So we look forward to that affiliation with the Business Committee for the Arts. I would like at this time to take just a few moments to acknowledge some individuals who have meant so much to this community. Over the past several years, the Missoula Cultural Council has tried to recognize contributions from artists, advocates, business leaders, and volunteers who have had such a positive impact on our community. They exemplify all the strands that are necessary to create a vital and a dynamic cultural life in any community. So I would like to introduce to you and acknowledge James Welch. James? James Welch is not just an internationally known novelist and expositor of the Native American culture. He's an inspiration to many Missoula writers. His contribution as a mentor is huge. Not only do we get to enjoy his talents, but the writers of this community get to gain such an insight into the process of writing from his ability and his willingness to help them. We appreciate so much what you've meant for Missoula and for our state. Barbara Thoreau. Not only is your bookstore, Fact and Fiction, a landmark of our cultural environment, you've encouraged local writers to persist in their sometimes lonely careers. A moving force in the Hellgate Writers when it was with us as an organization, you have been an important factor in the success of the literary arts of our community, and we appreciate so much your contributions. On behalf of the Cultural Council, let me award you this Cultural Achievement Award. Teresa Cox. Teresa was the guiding spirit of the Carousel for Missoula and the Dragon Hollow Playground that now accompanies it. And those facilities are a symbol of the community spirit of Missoula and add so much to the culture as a concrete symbol of the culture of our community and the way it manifests itself here. We appreciate so much all you've done for this community, for its school children, as well as for everyone else. We have observed so many times people from all over the state and all over the region coming to the Carousel as part of their stop in Missoula. That is a beautiful example of cultural tourism at its most positive. Thank you so much. And lastly, I'd like to introduce you to John and Sue Talbot. two are tireless advocates and supporters of the arts and the humanities in Missoula and Missoula's cultural ambassadors to a wider world. Whether it's to speak to the school board, to join another board, to carry the load and do some of the heavy lifting, they're always there. They're always there to give us a hand, and they're always there to articulate our cultural outlook for this community. I was trying to just, the Talbots are such a positive force. I looked at them as our cultural conscience of Missoula. We appreciate so much everything this day done for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And now it's my pleasure to call to the podium my good friend and colleague, the Executive Director of the Montana Committee for the Humanities, Mark Sherraus. Mark?
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to see so many friends here, so many people who have helped the humanities and the arts, and so many that we've helped as well with the Arts Council and MCH. This is a lovely gathering. I'm very proud to be here. I bring you greetings from Bruce Cole, who was the chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities, a letter written earlier this week, and I'll just simply read it to you. Dear Montana cultural friends, I congratulate you on gathering October 4th to celebrate National Arts and Humanities Month, and especially the Missoula Cultural Council for providing leadership in organizing this event. The partnership between humanities and arts communities in Montana is long-standing and exemplary, and certainly is one to celebrate. The events of the past year or more have demonstrated to us all once again the importance of the humanities and the arts in our national life in providing for healing, understanding, and resolution. I commend you all in furthering that work and offer my best wishes as you continue to serve the people of Montana. Sincerely, Bruce Cole, Chairman. Thank you.
And now, the Executive Director of the Montana Arts Council, Arlen Fishbaugh, to introduce our speaker, Frank Hodsoll.
Thank you, Joe. I first would like to read a letter from Eileen Mason, the acting chair of the National Endowment for the Arts. To all gathered in Missoula to celebrate the National Arts and Humanities Month, I send my best wishes and warmest personal regards. Missoula is an outstanding example of a community that has embraced the arts. The International Choral Festival, the Carousel, the Festival of the Book, and public art installations throughout the city have enriched the lives of the citizens of Missoula and the thousands who visit Montana each year. Citizens of Missoula understand that while music, theater, dance, and painting have the ability to lift our spirits, stir our souls, broaden our perspectives, and define our beliefs, the arts also strengthen economies, re-energize cities, and help educate our young people. The National Endowment for the Arts takes great pride in tracing its involvement with Missoula back to a 1978 grant that became a seed money for Missoula's downtown riverfront beautification and trail system that today distinguishes this community as the city where a river runs through it. And today we are proud that the Arts Endowment grants are still at work bringing music, theater, festival, and arts education programs to cities and towns across Montana. Earlier this year, as the guest of Mark Martin and the Missoula Cultural Council, I was fortunate enough to enjoy the arts offerings and warm hospitality of this wonderful city. My sincere thanks to all of you for your enthusiastic support of art and culture in the life of your community. Sincerely, Eileen B. Mason, Senior Deputy Chairman of the NEA. So she's obviously a big fan of Missoula, and you won her over. As she recognized Mark Martin, I would just like briefly to say a big thank you to Mark Martin, too. He's just a phenomenal ambassador for Missoula. You guys are so lucky to have him. Mark really does just do a yeoman's work. And it's always so much fun to work with him as well. It's my privilege to introduce to you Frank Hodsoll. As you know from reading your programs here, Frank was the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts for 8 years during the 1980s. He was also the first deputy director of the OMB and the chief fiscal officer for the United States government, in addition to many other responsibilities. I think it's really interesting for people to know that we did a study of communities in Montana and when the nonprofit arts organizations were founded. And 90 to 95% of all nonprofit arts organizations were founded after the National Endowment for the Arts was established and after the Montana Arts Council was established. The two events happened in close concurrence in the mid-60s, mid to late 60s. And I think that is really an incredible thing when you think about it. It's not to say that arts organizations can't survive without the NEA or the Montana Arts Council, but that these organizations were such an important catalyst in getting them started. And the fact, as Dave Nelson pointed out to me earlier today, the fact that there still are 50 state arts councils in existence after over 30 years is really an impressive fact, especially when many of them have gone through as much hell as we've gone through in Montana. I think that we've gone through about as much rancor as you could possibly go through of any state. And Frank, this is why it's a special privilege for me to introduce Frank, because he's such a perfect example of how the arts are not partisan. You know, they should never have become a partisan issue to begin with. And to hear Frank talk about arts and community and the benefits of the art is really quite a soaring experience. It's my honor to introduce to you Frank Hodsoll.
Thank you very much, Arlene, for that very kind introduction. It's an honor and a privilege for me to be here and to renew a acquaintanceship with a number of people that I worked with even back in my day, which is seems like a long time ago at the Arts Endowment. Now the 80s, I thought they were fairly contemporary, but I was just in a high school class here this morning and discovered that a lot of things I was talking about was before everybody else had been born. So I'm learning a little bit. One of those people has already been recognized, but I need to recognize him too, and that's Pat Williams, who was the chairman of our authorization committee in the Congress when we come up for reauthorization at the Arts Endowment in the mid-'80s. And he was a real colleague, and there was no partisanship on his part, and I hope he didn't think it was on my part. We worked together on doing that in those days, and he's a great friend of the arts, and it's great to see him again here in Missoula. So let's give him a hand. I also want to do something else, and this is by no means a complaint about what went before, but maybe I'm getting old and I forgot or didn't hear or something, but the interior of these baskets was, these sacks was mentioned, but I want to mention the exterior. These were all done by kids. Look at them, they're all different and they're extraordinary, and that's what the arts are. They're all different and they're extraordinary, and the community participates, kids participate, and this is a good example. And those of you who get elected for office, I've even been elected for office once, these are the future. These are the kids that are coming through, and the arts are a part of that, and I just would like to recognize it. I'd like to say, Arlene, that in these difficult economic times in Montana, my sort of adopted state when I left Washington, unfortunately, I guess in some ways I'm back in Washington. Colorado is in also tough economic times. And I think the fact that the Montana State Arts Council's budget was treated on a par with other agencies is a tribute to your fine governor, to Judy Martz, the legislature, and you and your board. So congratulations. That's hard work. It takes time. And the other thing that I'd like to mention is as I went through and I looked at the governor's sort of strategic objectives, and I looked at the Arts Council's strategic objectives, and they match. And I figure that wasn't an accident either, and I think that's smart and that's good. And in talking with Arlene, as I read in the Missoulian this morning, one thing I do when I go to a town, I try to read the morning newspaper to see if I can be somewhat intelligent about what's going on, and recognizing that I've only caught a tiny glimpse of it all. But the front page story by, I would suggest, a very good reporter in the Missoulian was on the state's budget problems and how on a $2.7 billion budget or whatever it is, that 200 and some odd million have to be cut across the board. And that's going to be tough. And Arlene tells me she can't be cut anymore, and she's making that case, and I wish you luck, okay, with that, because it's important. I guess I would say one thing on that, and that is there's a tendency to think that arts and culture are something that can be on the edge, and if you're really tough, you don't have to fund them anymore. I would argue almost the opposite, that when times are tough, making sure that the arts and cultural activities and the community activities that are associated with them, I'm going to talk about that a little more today, that they remain strong, because they're not only part of the infrastructure, they're also a part of the attraction and the morale of communities in this state and in other states. So I'm going to definitely wish you luck with that. I understand that I've met two of them. We have 3 Missoula County Commissioners and about 5 City Council members in the room, and I want to thank you all for being here and for your support of art and culture. I was where you are when I was a commissioner of Ouray County in Colorado, and I've been talking with your wonderful mayor here in Missoula, Mike Cadis, about some of the non-arts problems that one deals with, like zoning and roads and garbage and public safety and the like. And having been a federal type most of my life, it was truly both a humbling and more honorable in some ways profession to come back to a small community and learn that potholes matter, that things really matter, and that your neighbors will call you at 3 a.m. in the morning to tell you, Hodsoll, what have you done about this? That didn't happen in Washington. There were more zeros, and there was all kinds of language, and Mike and I were talking about writing, things in bits of paper and so on, because he was in the state legislature. But when you're at the local level, you are where the people are. And I'll tell you, I knew when I did good, and I surely knew when I did bad, and it was instant. It was just like that. So that was a very good experience. But we not only worried about those things, we also worried about the county's cultural life. And the county's cultural life, this county's cultural life, any county's cultural life, any city's cultural life is critical, I would argue, to that community, to its identity, to its economic development. I'm going to talk more about that because that's a good argument to make, for its education and cultural literacy, and for its social needs. I think I'm going to do better if I get rid of the paperclip. Excuse me. Mike Cadis, I think, understands this. Thank you for being here, Mr. Mayor. I understand that you've been a continuous supporter of the Missoula Cultural Council, and from what I've seen and heard, I think that's a wise investment on behalf of your citizens. I'd like again to pause and say a thing about what I'm going to call 2 Marks. I'm here because of Mark Johnson, who's the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council, and a former Foreign Service officer like me in my peripatetic past and so on, and also Mark Martin. Both of them have made my visit here an extraordinarily rewarding one. I hope it was rewarding for others. I visited, as I say, with a high school class, and that was just plain fun for me. I hope it wasn't too awful for them, but it's kind of neat. And what I want to say about the 2 Marks for somebody like me coming here is they filled my days with a number of things that are going to make me truly dangerous when I go home, because I'm going to have had enough of a flavor of different parts of Missoula to actually say things about it and probably be wrong, but they're all going to be good, so you don't have to worry too much about it. I've enjoyed it immensely. But you've got 2 great leaders in both those guys. I'd like to begin by saying it's an honor for me to be here during a National Arts and Humanities Month. I'm going to join President Bush in urging all citizens here in this great state to participate in activities that celebrate our rich artistic and intellectual heritage, and to learn more about the artists and scholars whose work continues to enrich our society, like the young people who did the Bugs Dance for us and others, our nation and the world. Most of you here in this room are already committed to this. I'm going to ask you especially when you get home, talk to your neighbors. Next time you go out to dinner with somebody next door or walk around the street or something, tell them about your commitment and get them involved too. So often we in the cultural community, we talk to all those of us who are of similar persuasion and we all feel good about it, but there's others out there who are receptive and they just need to be brought in. I understand that from Mark Martin that my Arts Endowment successor, Bill Ivey, had a great speechwriter because he had a good handle on the rich art and culture of Missoula and Montana when he came here. Mark also told me what a good time Bill Ivey had when he was here, and Bill I know very well, and we were talking, and he said absolutely that was true. And I told Mark I didn't have a speechwriter. You see, I'm past that stage. I'm in the older stage where you don't have speechwriters anymore, and that I would need a little help in getting up to speed. And I got a few weeks ago an annotated package that was followed by several emails and a fax yesterday. And I'm going to try and do these justice as I relate some of the things I'm going to talk about generally to what I understand you are doing. Bicentennial commemoration, I'm looking forward tomorrow to going out and seeing that here. And I understand you're one of the world's experts on Lewis and Clark, and of course they were amazing people way back then. And finally, congratulations to the Mission Valley Friends of the Arts for their cultural inventory and plan for the city of Polson and Lake County. Last evening, I talked a bit about America and the world, a clash of cultures with a question mark. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of culture in building communities. These two topics are really related. They're like backs of hands. In the sense that different and shared cultures can produce conflict on some occasions, and they can build community on the other. The context and the people are all important in this. More often than not, I would argue they build community and they make peace. Yesterday I was talking about conflict. Today is about community and bridging differences. You Missoulians and Montanans live in a God's country. I lived in southwestern Colorado. I view that as God's country. Northern Virginia is okay, but it isn't quite God's country, and are blessed in the arts and humanities. Mark tells me that Montana, with a population of less than 1 million, has 8 symphony orchestras, including a fine one which I've been reading about here in Missoula. What a joy to hear all that music, but what a commitment to make all those things happen in a state that has less than 1 million people in it. Thank you to Montanans for that. I was also struck by your recent Montana Festival of the Book, bringing together writers and readers, and of course a writer and a bookstore person have been honored here today. I see that Fort Benton will have a cultural corridor tourism workshop October 9th and 10th with Becky Anderson, Executive Director of Handmade in America. Becky, I gather, has been in Missoula twice, most recently when the Missoula Cultural Council was chosen by the Partners in Tourism Coalition to host a national pilot workshop on cultural tourism. On November 14th, I understand the Cultural Council will launch its Cultural Corridors project with 4 such corridors through western Montana using Missoula as their gateway city. Becky's a friend of mine, and she's been here twice. Some of you, how many of you experienced Becky Anderson? Quite a few. Well, those of you who have will know what I'm about to say is true then, because she's an extraordinary leader and she's also a gifted speaker. Her message in Appalachia, where she is more normally than not, is that you must work with the assets that you have available in your area to build new economies based on the knowledge and the artistic skills of the people already in the community. And that is surely true. I understand, and it's already been mentioned, that the Missoula Cultural Council is affiliated with the Business Committee for the Arts. I won't say a lot about that other than to say you're lucky to have Judy Jedlicka come out here. She's a good person, and a partnership with business, as has already been mentioned, is all important. Let me also and I'm just about to get there to start, and I'm going to be pretty short. Actually, I'm going to tell a story first to reassure you after all of this. My story is about a family in the Midwestern city that decided they were going to go to a new church one day. And I was going to do this at the beginning, and then I kind of forgot, so it'll fit here. And they went to they heard it was a good preacher, and so they went to the church. And they sat in their pews, and the preacher got up and he made a sermon, and the sermon went on, and it went on, and it went on. And finally it came to an end. and they were leaving the church. And as they were walking out the church, there was a wall there with entablatures on it with names under dates like 1917, 1918, 1941, 1945, 1949, 1953, and so on. And a little girl turned to her father and said, "Dad, who are all those names?" And he said, "Well, those are the names of those who died in service." And she said, "Which one? The 9 o'clock or the 11 o'clock?" I'm going to try to not have that happen to you here. I'm just about to begin. But a word on our Center for Arts and Culture, which I chair the board of. Our president and CEO is a woman by the name of Ellen Lovell, who helped start the Saving America's Treasures program. I was in the Reagan administration, she was in the Clinton administration, but that doesn't matter. Bill Ivey, who is here, is currently a senior fellow, and we're a Washington-based think tank on culture and trying to broaden and deepen the conversation on it. We began as a confederation of 28 colleges and universities, and I would be hopeful that after this meeting, I forgot to say this last night, Mark, that the University of Montana or some in it might want to join us in that. Doesn't cost anything. We produced a couple of books published by the New Press on the politics of culture and on art and religion, which is very interesting, I would suggest. And we're now in the process of completing a series on art, culture, and the national agenda, one of which is on communities, and I'm just about to start on that. Our current focus includes preservation, cultural partnerships at the state level that include the arts, humanities, historic preservation, and folklore. There is power in those combinations. And finally, one on cultural diplomacy, which was a lot of what I talked about last night. The Center's issue paper, Strengthening Communities Through Culture, was written by a woman at Rutgers by the name of Elizabeth Strom, and we published it in November of 2001. Strom noted that the term art and culture encompasses all creative expressions. Some of this art and culture will be popular, and some won't be. Some will survive the test of time, and most won't. Some will be for-profit, some not for-profit. Some will be undertaken by professionals who devote their careers. Some will be undertaken by amateurs. Art and culture are not just for elites. They are intrinsic to communities at all levels, and that's sort of the context. The Center's issue paper identified 4 areas. I've already mentioned them, and I'll just get right into it. The first is community identity. Communities, whether a village, a city block, or a large metropolis, are held together by multiple cross-cutting bonds. Research, real research, demonstrates that residents who frequently participate in cultural activities are generally more satisfied with the quality of their life in the communities. I understand that the Montana Arts Council and the Montana Committee for the Humanities have fostered the use of local resources to inculcate a sense of place in Montanan communities, including historic preservation and cultural tourism. And there's a lot of gold in them there are hills. In another state, to the west of you, in Oregon, the Oregon Trust for Cultural Development came about as a result of a poll that indicated that Oregonians didn't know what it was to be an Oregonian. The governor and legislators of both parties and all sides of the political spectrum, and truly they were all sides of the political spectrum, worried about the economic and social impact of a state that lacked identity. And so they brought together all these different folks, from the local public television to historic preservation to the Arts Council, the Humanities Council, et cetera, and they put together additional monies, and they developed, or put it this way, they created a framework with which communities could develop their own cultural plans. And so far, it looks as though that's heading in the right direction. A similar thing is happening in Maine, and I might note that Maine, a state in real trouble at the moment economically, this is the one thing in their budget that not only didn't go down, it went up as a result of all of these things being brought together. Let me now turn to economic development, because this is kind of a bottom line issue as opposed to a philosophical one, though I would argue philosophy in some cases can be more important. Americans for the Arts note that not-for-profit arts industry generates $134 billion in economic activity nationally, 4.85 million full-time jobs, $89.4 billion in household income, $6.6 billion in local government tax revenues, $7.3 billion in state government tax revenues, $10.5 billion in federal income tax revenues, and $24 billion in tax revenues generally. The Americans for the Arts study was based on surveys of 3,000 not-for-profit arts organizations and 40,000 attendees at arts events in 91 cities in 33 states plus the District of Columbia. Missoula, through the Missoula Cultural Council, was one of the 91 communities participating in the study. The Americans for the Arts study was influential. There's no question about it. It was cited on the floor of the House in persuading the House of Representatives, not normally hugely ebullient on the National Endowment for the Arts, or at least not in recent times, to add $10 million this year to the budget for the NEA. And interestingly, this time the Senate is sort of doing this and that, but the House did that, and it was largely based on a speech by two people on the House floor making those number figures that I just did. So that strikes a chord. The Center's issue paper says art and culture add value to a locality's ability to attract businesses and their employees. We certainly thought that even in little Ouray County. It is certainly a factor in the greater Washington area. It is a factor in my native city of Los Angeles. It is a factor in towns, and I know that it is considered a factor here. While the economic value of culture should not be overblown, I mean, there are obviously other things that are in effect when you're doing economic development, there is, I think, a clear body of evidence indicating that well-conceived cultural investments made as a part of a prudent economic development strategy contribute to the success of that strategy. On another front, historic preservation can serve as an economic catalyst. Whole districts have been rejuvenated for residential and commercial use. New Orleans was in real trouble until Moon Landers started restoring some of those houses in the French Quarter by capitalizing on existing assets of the built environment rather than beginning anew. We worked on this a great deal in Ouray County. In New Mexico, in fact, we've made the press, the national press, over somebody wants to tear down our mining structures, but he's torn down one, but hopefully he won't tear down any more. In New Mexico, the not-for-profit Cornerstones, it's a little different wrinkle on it, engages local residents, mostly from rural Hispanic and Native American towns, in local preservation projects. Of particular importance is investment, I would suggest, in cultural tourism. This is important in rural as well as urban areas. Examples noted in our issue paper include North Adams, Massachusetts, where a contemporary art museum was established in part to lure visitors in an area once dependent on manufacturing. Use of cultural assets just to the west of you to diversify northern Washington's economic base, and county celebration of local arts resources in rural Pennsylvania. You in Missoula understand the importance of the arts and culture to the economy. Your cultural council has fostered culture tourism. It's about to launch 4 cultural corridors, and I've already mentioned that. Mark Martin also tells me that the Missoula Area Economic Development Corporation recognizes the value of a community's cultural resources in attracting high-value businesses and developing a creative local workforce. I understand Dick King, Executive Director of the Economic Development Corporation, and staff are here today. Thank you for coming, Dick. Where are you? Are you here? Great. Thank you for coming. Education and community and the arts. Education and cultural literacy are clearly important to community development. A skilled workforce that understands cultural differences and similarities and can participate comfortably in a variety of cultural activities with others of different cultural backgrounds will likely be more productive on and off the job. The Montana Arts Council has made arts education its first strategic objective through promoting the value of arts in education, the quality of arts education programs in Montana, through improving art skills for teachers and teaching skills of artists, and through making the arts a basic in Montana schools, and also for expanding access to arts education in unserved and underserved communities. The Missoula Arts Council knows the importance of arts education in its community. I was very fortunate to meet at breakfast with a number of folks who are in the school system and learned a lot about some of that here this morning. I think that I would just note that obviously there's some examples. The Utah Opera, which brought 1,000 students from western Montana to the University of Montana's University Theater. The Art Museum of Missoula, whose director is here today and hope to visit the Art Museum later on, conducts a variety of programs to introduce 5th graders to the world of art. Actually, Laura Millen is here today, and I thank you, Laura, for being here. Where is she? Finally, social needs. The Center's issue paper notes that 61% of arts agencies have programs that use the arts explicitly to address social problems. And the funding of these programs by state and local arts agencies is on the rise. The Justice Department is a big supporter of these kinds of programs, and almost everybody's administration, based on 1998 findings that participants in these programs are significantly less likely to become involved in criminal activity, in some cases by factors of 2 or 3. That's a powerful, it seems to me, argument in addition to the economic arguments. A 2000 study of the Chicago Center for Arts Policy showed that participants in informal neighborhood arts projects cultivate social skills that promote tolerance and the ability to imagine social change. The Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliances, for example, reinforced interpersonal bonds and intertribal bonds and been successful as well economically. I understand that Missoula is using arts and culture in these ways as well, commemorating the first anniversary of September 11 with rolling Mozart Requiem performance, the Missoula Symphony, and the Choral Society. I understand choral director Don Carey, who is a cultural award winner, is here today, and he's already been recognized, I think. Thank you for being here, Don. The Missoula Cultural Council's German Fest provides opportunities to celebrate the community's ethnic heritage, and Missoula agencies like Opportunity Resources and the Council on Aging encourage participation in the visual and performing arts as a means of meeting the needs of their clients. In conclusion, the importance of arts and culture in strengthening communities, in my view, cannot be overstated. Civic leaders, public and private, need to make the case and also to provide resources. Local and state governments need to foster partnerships among developers and business, community development organizations, social service organizations, arts and artist groups, and heritage preservation groups to make the arts and culture part of economic development. School districts need to take seriously federal and state standards and guidelines involving arts education and ensure sequential K through 12 curricula and teaching that results in every child having core competencies in the arts and humanities. All the paperwork says that, but it doesn't happen all that often. And institutions of higher education should require competencies in art and culture as a condition of admission. California State now does that, and so does the University of California. I don't know what happens here, but it's something that's important because ultimately people are all going to the next level. Let me absolutely conclude with an overarching point, just as I absolutely began several times with various points. The health and vitality of America's many communities, I would argue, are critical to democracy, to free markets, and a civil society. Those were the words I used about other countries last night. Because it seems to me that to achieve these goals in communities and countries outside our borders, and that's surely in our national security interest, we must also be sure that we are moving forward in our own way within our borders. Our homeland and our national security depend on the example that we set as much as any military or political power at home and abroad. It is not acceptable for Americans, Montanans, or Missoulians not to have a sense of who they are. Oregon, all their political leaders surely recognize that, and I suspect political leaders here also recognize that. As individuals, who they are as individuals and in the places in which they live and operate. Places begin at the community level. I might add, so do cyber groupings. That's another speech. I won't go on with it, but believe me, they do. An understanding of the common threads that unite groups in common endeavors is essential, it seems to me, if individuals and their communities are to make progress in the modern world. Art and culture are important, indeed critical, to that understanding. Thank you.
Would you entertain any questions? Thank you, Mr. Hodsoll. He has consented to entertain some questions, if there are any, for a few minutes.
Questions, or if you like, declamations, anything you like. Thank you. You saved me from no questions. That's fine.
I just wanted to say, in addition to being one of the cultural icons of Missoula, I think the most remarkable thing about fact and fiction is that it survived the influences of the large chains that have come in and the franchises that sell so much more for so much less. So I wonder if you might be able to offer from a for-profit point of view words of wisdom for her nonprofit colleagues about how she does that.
Want to come up? Can we do that? Oh, you got one there. That's probably easier. I'm sorry. Doesn't work? Here. Wait a minute. I think my limited mechanical skills.
Is that going to give you feedback? I think it's, the words of Kermit the Frog, it ain't easy being green. It's becoming involved in a community, and Missoula is quite an understanding and open community, but you can't lie back on your laurels. You have to continue to keep your eyes and ears open and figure out some of the things that are going on and respond to your customers, who a lot of you are right here in this room, and that's wonderful support that Fact and Fiction does receive. I think opening a business 16 years ago as a woman was also critical in Missoula, because people were supportive of small businesses that were owned and operated by a woman. Just being involved in a community, being downtown, that was a key thing, to be downtown and have a lot of the tourists that come to town, a lot of the educators, a lot of the professionals that are within an area. And I think our downtown in Missoula is very healthy, in spite of all the big boxes and places that have come in on the outskirts, because we stay on top of what our community is and what it means to us. And I think everybody that's in the downtown area, whether it's a nonprofit or a small business or the government offices, we all have a passion for what it is we do, and you don't often find passion in a chain store and a big box.
Okay.
Question of the...
That was wonderful. Yes, sir.
A question of the climate of the arts as they were in the 80s, and then what you see now in our country, it's better or worse. And then secondly, from the standpoint of mining history, have preservation efforts in the right, have you seen Butte and its efforts in that line?
Let me deal with the second one first. I have not seen Butte, but I'd love to see Butte, because I've heard about Butte, even though I've not been there. So I can't really comment beyond that. In terms of the climate for the arts in this country now versus then, when I was heavily in it, well, I'm still fairly heavily in it, but I would say you have to take that in bites. At the federal level, in terms of the National Endowment for the Arts, things were pretty good when I was there, and I'm not criticizing my successors or anything else, but there was a period of great turmoil, and then it came back. Thanks actually to Bill Ivey, one of my successors, I think probably did more than anything else to restore confidence in the Congress on both sides of the aisle. He did an absolutely super job. I had some of those problems, but nothing like what happened later. In terms of state art, I'm going to go sort of gradually increasing in the amount of resources they bring to bear. And then I'll end with the arts. In terms of state arts agencies, until the recent economic downturn, they were doing, on the whole, pretty good. The monies were going up. They were considerably like double or triple, and they're much more than the endowment has in terms of monies going out to artists and arts groups and the like. At the local level, there has been a burgeoning right along. I mean, Bob Lynch says that it's almost $1 billion in public and private monies coming through local arts agencies. In the private sector, if you look at the Giving USA statistics and the like, arts and humanities funding, because they're grouped basically there, has, but we're talking about $10 billion, B for $1 billion, as opposed to hundreds of millions, up to $1 billion. in this case. Arts funding has gone up slightly, but at a rate slightly lower than inflation. But it continues to creep upwards. Though since September 11th, there are a lot of worries about traditional funders moving into areas, moving some of their monies that were in the arts into other areas, or into arts areas that have more to do with terrorism and things abroad than they do with domestically. In terms of ticket sales and membership subscriptions, those are, again, I'm going to stop before September 11th. The jury isn't in post-September, at least not to my knowledge. They were going up. It was in general there were more more ticket sales, even though some of the prices were higher than any of us would have liked, because it precludes a lot of people from being able to go. In terms of the arts themselves, as opposed to the economics of the arts, I think that America is in maybe a transitional period. In the not-for-profit arts, and then I'll come to movies and television and popular recordings. In the not-for-profit arts, there was a period in the really starting in the 50s with the abstract expressionists, and the 60s with 50s, well, actually, you can go back to the 30s with Martha Graham, but there was a period of enormous creativity, particularly post-World War II and going up through the 70s. I mean, all over the place. I mean, there was just new stuff happening across the board, and it was happening in different ways than perhaps it had happened before in a lot of different areas. I don't know that I could say that entirely about literature, but I certainly can say it about the performing arts and about visual art and design. After some of those seminal figures passed from the scene, it was, and particularly in the world of dance, which I sort of have a little bit of a sense of, there was, oh my gosh, now what do we do? Because we're in dance, unlike in other areas. I mean, symphony orchestras play some new stuff, but they play Beethoven and Brahms and the like, whereas dance has always been expected. It isn't any good unless it's a new thing. You can't repeat the canon, and they have great difficulty preserving choreography. That's something I'm particularly concerned about because it's sort of ephemeral. It's more ephemeral than other things. There was a period of, gosh, now what do we do? But, Jerry Arpino, who's taken over from Joffrey, has found a little bit his own stride, and so things are proceeding. In the commercial world, I would argue that today there is more variety of different kinds than there almost has ever been before. Certainly when there was a studio system, I'm talking movies now, excuse me, there were limits to the kinds of movies. And now, basically every movie is its own production. It's released and distributed by a major studio if it's lucky, and so on and so forth. But they're almost individual entrepreneurship, and stars, just as authors who are stars have more access than people nobody's ever heard of. But then you've got My Big Fat Greek Wedding out of nowhere, and it's a star, and there's going to be a television. Who knows? I mean, whether it's going to be any good. But you do have quite a lot of variety, and Miramax and others are doing, I think, a pretty good job there. The music business is not so hot, popular or otherwise. It's having financial difficulties because of copyright and Napster and all of that, but it's also having other kinds of difficulties. America and the visual arts, there's some new stuff, but there's nothing that smacks you or has received, let us put, the publicity to become a trend the way some of the earlier periods. And trends and publicity are increasingly important. Some people decry it and probably should decry it, but it's also, it's a fact. It's the way it works. So that's a very long-winded, longer answer, but I wanted to cover all the bases. That's sort of what I think, and I'm probably wrong on at least 30% of it. But at least I'm not wrong on the financial figures. I know those. But you could talk to others, and probably bottom line is America's doing okay, and there's a lot of artists out there doing extraordinarily good work. We're very much respected in other countries for our art. We're viewed as the center of culture, and a lot of people say everybody complains about it, but in fact they don't. They complain about other things, but by and large they don't complain about a lot of our culture. I won't say that they don't complain about some of it. So there's no cultural war that I can detect out there. Yes, ma'am.
I attended your lecture last night, and so my question is partly about the speech you gave last night, and also what you're talking about here, which is kind of a reiteration on a national level, which I think are all very good ideas, but what I'm concerned about is funding, particularly for the kind of exchange, cultural exchange you were talking about, that we're in a time of apparent recession. And is your organization in a position where it's going to be implementing policies that would provide that kind of money?
Sure. Well, I appreciate that question. Last night, for those of you who weren't there, at the end, after talking about clashes of civilizations in a broad political sense, I did talk about an initiative that we have underway to increase the amount of money and also to enrich the programming as a part of public diplomacy for cultural diplomacy. The time is absolutely right. There will be money. We're making progress. The first sign of that progress is that we have a State Department authorization bill, this is a mechanic, but it will create a special committee, advisory to the Secretary of State on cultural diplomacy. That's the first time that's ever happened. It will create a voice, if you will, on that. Almost everyone that we talk to on the Hill, whether Republican or Democrat, and in the administration, feel that I'm going to take this at a broader level, that public diplomacy, not just cultural diplomacy, but all of it needs to be strengthened. That if we're going to win a war on terrorism, however that may be defined, we are going to have to do it in non-governmental ways as much as in governmental ways. Military and political power are limited, and you are talking about hearts and minds, and we're going to have to be a lot more inventive and creative about it than we have in the past, though not all the past. Part of the reason why the wall came down between what was the Soviet Union and Western Europe was the interaction culturally on a broad level. I'm not just talking about the arts now, that happened. The U.S. government and others supported a good bit of that. If we're to make a dent, culture has got to be one of what I call the arrows in the quiver. In terms of money, there will be more money for this. I think you will see the administration proposing more money. I think you will see Congress willing to put more money. I don't think I'm wrong on, I could be wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong on that. There's a huge amount of support for the fact that it's a heck of a lot cheaper if you can make it less hospitable in the countries that harbor the kinds of people that Osama bin Laden and his his colleagues are, hospitable for them to be there. It is not in our interest to have too many Taliban-type regimes floating around. And there are a lot of other countries, and now I'm not going to have a headline just because I'm going to single out countries. There are a lot of other countries around, particularly in the Middle East, particularly in the Middle East, that are run by dictatorships. And there's some evidence to show that the reason we're hated is because they view us as supporting them, and they're hated, and they have no institutions whereby they can make those changes in the normal sense of the world. Their kids are going to madrasas and just learning the Quran. They can't succeed and go ahead because they don't have skills that can be useful in making a living. It's sort of like, I happen to be a Christian, but it'd be like me if I just read the Bible and didn't do anything else. I'd have a heck of a time making a living as I do with the federal government on management issues. I'd have to have a little bit more than just a biblical reference for that. So bottom line, yes, I think there won't be a huge amount of money for culture probably, but it was shot down in an earlier period, and in the sense of not shot down philosophically, but shot down in terms of resources available when USIA was merged into the State Department back a few years. We have now a quick political thing. We have between us at the center, which can't get into lobbying, but I can, and a group called CoLead, which is the Coalition for Leadership Abroad, which a friend of mine runs, which is all the lobbying groups for the foreign affairs budget, for State Department, international aid, all those kinds of things. And we've now established a combination. We are a group, and we've got a name, and we're working the Hill, and we're working the administration, and we've got people, ex-ambassadors and folks like that, like Mark Johnson, and we've got, cultural people, who lobby for things like the NAA budget, but also some famous names as well. And we're going to be working the Hill, the appropriations part of the Hill, next year. So the proof will be in the pudding in the 2004 federal budget, but I think there are more resources. I'm also getting the impression that there are private resources that can be brought to bear here. And finally, I want to make, because Arlene is here, we've talked with NASA, with the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies. There are a lot of states who have international programs, and they do it for economic development reasons. And one of the things, as a friend of mine who used to be the ambassador in the Netherlands, and would say, you know, it sure would be nice if, like in the old days, like 10 years ago when they did this, if an ambassador in a post, or the staff had a post, an embassy or consul general or whatever abroad, could have a list of who's coming through, whether they be scientists or artists. I mean, there are a lot of people just coming through. They're having exchanges with universities and so on and so forth. Well, heck, we can surely do that. I've talked with Pat Harrison about that. We're going to do that. So that way you can allow the official government, and official government has to be very careful here. We don't want to be too visible. We don't want it to be too visible. I'm not part of it anymore. But because that it becomes suspicious in a lot of countries. But it is if somebody in our post has an idea that, you know, that person, he or she, can help bring those people together in a university audience. If it's a performance, it could be a performance, whatever it is. But you latch on, you save money, you become more effective and efficient by doing that, while thinking very carefully about what it is that will help. Last thing I will say on this, because I really believe it, we've also got to bring their folks here. When I was at the Endowment, it was extremely, I mean, a friend of mine used to be the ambassador in Chile, and we brought the Santiago Ballet up here. And all I did was help them get a spot on an off day at Lincoln Center. And you wouldn't believe, because they didn't have that entry point. I mean, it was easy for me to pick up the phone. It was great because it didn't cost any money, because the Chileans wanted to pay for it all. They just wanted to say they'd been at Lincoln Center. And my friend, the ambassador, said, you wouldn't believe. You know, at cocktail parties and dinners, the cabinet and so on, we were talking about it for weeks. And it actually opened some doors. And one last point for those of you who weren't there last night. 50% of the heads of state and the cabinets of the coalition against terrorism, whether they are in the Middle East, Western Europe, or elsewhere, were here in America on a Fulbright or an international visitor program. And you can betcha that that makes a difference, because they know us. They have friends here. We have friends of theirs who can talk to them off record. And we do that all the time. We do that on military levels. We do that on political levels. It's enormously important. Having said that, you got to be strong militarily, you got to be strong politically, you got to be strong economically. But this is the other quiver, or the other arrow. And it's important to do that as well. And yes, I think we will get some money.
Well, on behalf of Mark Martin and the Missoula Cultural Council, thank you for coming, and have a pleasant day.
Thank you for your support of the cultural.